Hey, welcome back. Sometimes history feels like it's made of stone and steel, of cold, hard facts. But every so often, a single story comes along that feels more like a myth. A tale of such staggering scale and finality that it almost seems impossible. That's what I felt the first time I learned about the Yamato. A battleship so massive, its very name was an ancient, poetic word for Japan itself. And its final mission, well, that's where our story begins. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi, and this is Flashpoints, the wars that shaped us. Today, episode 24, the Yamato's last voyage, sinking the unsinkable Japanese battleship. Picture this, it's April 6, 1945. The war in the Pacific is in its final, brutal chapter. American forces have landed on Okinawa, just 350 miles from the Japanese home islands. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once a terrifying force that ruled the seas, is a shadow of its former self. Its carriers are gone. Its aircrews are gone. But in a harbor at Tokiyama, one last symbol of imperial power remains, the battleship Yamato. She was a leviathan, over 860 feet long, displacing more than 70,000 tons. Her main turrets, each housing three 18-inch guns, could fire a shell the weight of a small car over 25 miles. For years, she was the largest, most powerfully armed battleship ever constructed. She was a state secret, a psychological weapon, a symbol of national pride. And on that April morning, she was being prepared for a one-way trip. The plan, codenamed Operation Tengo, was not a plan for victory. It was a plan for a ritual death. Yamato, along with a light cruiser and 8 destroyers, was to sail straight for the American invasion fleet at Okinawa. There was no air cover. There was barely enough fuel for a one-way journey. The mission was to beach herself on Okinawa's shores, use her colossal guns to bombard the American forces, and fight until she was destroyed. The 3,300 men aboard were not expected to return. It was to be a glorious, suicidal sacrifice, a samurai's death for a modern warship, to redeem the honor of the Navy. As an engineer, I look at the Yamato, and I see an astonishing feat of human ingenuity and industrial might. The sheer problem-solving required to build something that immense, to make it float, to make it move, to make it fight, it's breathtaking. But as a storyteller, I see the profound, tragic disconnect. They had built this masterpiece of steel, but the war had changed. The era of the battleship, of these floating fortresses trading broadsides, was already over. The new kings of the ocean flew off aircraft carriers. Yamato was a magnificent answer to a question the world was no longer asking. So at 3:20 p.m., Yamato weighed anchor. The crew, many of them young cadets who'd been given a crash course in their duties, stood on her decks. Some believed in the mission's purpose. Many did not. But they sailed. Almost immediately, American submarines spotted them. The element of surprise, the one slim advantage they might have had, was gone. The next morning, April 7th, the first American scout planes appeared on the horizon. The crew went to battle stations. The ship's immense anti-aircraft guns, hundreds of them, pointed at the sky. They knew what was coming. And at about 12:30 p.m., it began. The first wave of carrier-based aircraft, Helldiver dive bombers, Avenger torpedo bombers, and fighter escorts, swarmed the task force. The sky turned black with anti-aircraft fire and American planes. For the first hour, Yamato's skilled helmsman and captain managed a desperate dance, weaving the giant ship to avoid the torpedoes streaking toward her. Her guns filled the air with smoke and shrapnel. But she was alone in a vast ocean, and the waves of planes kept coming. Over 300 aircraft would attack that day. The tactic was brutal and effective. The dive bombers aimed for her decks, to knock out her anti-aircraft guns and cause topside chaos. But the Real killers were the Avengers, flying low and slow, dropping their torpedoes into the water. They concentrated their attacks on Yamato's port side, her left side. The goal was to cause an unstoppable list, a tilt that would make the ship capsize. And it worked. Hit after hit slammed into her port hull. The damage control teams fought a losing battle. To counter the list, the order was given to flood the starboard boiler rooms. This meant sacrificing the men trapped in those compartments, and it meant cutting the ship's speed in half. It was a horrific choice, and it barely helped. Yamato was now a wounded giant, slowing down, listing further and further to port. The final wave of attackers sealed her fate. More torpedoes hammered into that exposed left side. By 2 p.m., the list was past 20 degrees. The ship was leaning so severely that her enormous main battery turrets, whose rotating mechanisms had failed, began to slide. Then, the unthinkable happened. One of the magazines, storing shells for the secondary guns, detonated. A massive fireball ripped through the superstructure. The list became uncontrollable. On the bridge, the captain was lashed to his chair by his loyal crew, refusing to abandon ship. The crew was given the order to abandon. Men scrambled across the steeply tilting decks, now wet with seawater and oil. The great ship paused, almost gracefully on her side. And then, at 2:23 p.m., the Yamato rolled over completely. As she went under, one of her forward magazines, holding hundreds of tons of explosives for her 18-inch guns, erupted in a colossal underwater explosion. The fireball was seen 100 miles away on Okinawa. The mushroom cloud rose over 20,000 feet into the sky. It was a funeral pyre fit for a legend. Of the 3,300 men aboard, only about 270 were rescued. The light cruiser and 4 destroyers were also sunk. It was the greatest loss of life at sea in a single vessel in naval history. So what do we make of this? The sinking of the Yamato wasn't a decisive battle. It didn't change the course of the war. Okinawa would fall after months of horrific fighting. The war would end with atomic fire, not naval gunfire. The mission was, from a military standpoint, utterly futile. But history isn't just about strategic outcomes. It's about symbols. And the Yamato was the ultimate symbol. Her last voyage marks the precise, violent end of an era. The age of the battleship, which began with dreadnoughts in World War I, reached its absolute peak with the Yamato and died with her on that afternoon in the East China Sea. It was the closing of a technological and tactical chapter. It was also a stark, terrible illustration of a military ideology willing to sacrifice its own, not for a strategic gain, but for a concept of honor that had become detached from reality. For me, sitting here in New York, thinking about the shipyards of Japan and the young men who sailed into those clear skies, it's a humbling reminder. We build our Yamatos, our grand projects, our institutions, our ideologies. We pour our best technology, our national spirit, our very identity into them. But the world turns. The context shifts. And we are faced with a choice, to adapt or to send our masterpiece on a final, glorious, tragic voyage into irrelevance. The story of the Yamato is a monument to that crossroads. Thank you for listening to this episode of Flashpoints. If these stories of history's turning points resonate with you, please share the show with a friend and subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more from me, Ibnul J. Farabi, and the entire team, visit our production home at Light Not Studios. https://www.lightnotstudios.com. Until next time, take care.